Hey, if this is your first time tuning in to Soul Care with Stevie Boy, I want to say thank you for taking the risk and clicking it up. If you're returning, I'm just gratified that you would come back. We're in First John chapter 3, and I have just a little bit more that I want us to think about from a verse that we talked about and thought about last time, verse 18. Dear children, pause. John, it's easy to just blitz past this, but it's worth a pause to reflect on the fact that John thought of the church as God's family. Why else would he use? He all the time is using family terminologies here. My dear children, that's a family idea. One that is so obvious, and it, it's all through the New Testament, and as well as often in the Old Testament, but especially in the New Testament. Remember how John said, where was it here? Yeah, there it is. This is in verse 16. And this is a reiteration of what he's already said 2 or 3 different ways. This is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ laid down his life for us, and we ought to lay down our lives for our brothers and sisters. When through the book of Acts and then in these letters, the epistles that follow, the believers were identified as brothers and sisters. I mean, that is the fundamental family terminology. And now, John writes, Dear children, I have a very strong conviction about the church being God's family. And I'm going to take a quick detour. Well, funny, when I think quick, it doesn't actually happen the way most people think of quick. But anyway, I'm going to take a detour to ask you to think with me about the dynamics of a family. There are healthy families and there are unhealthy families, and there's everything in between. In a healthy family, that's what I want to focus on. In a healthy family, one of the ideas that prevails is a question that we continually answer. The question being, how can our family thrive? Now, in an unhealthy family, the main question is always, how do I get what I want? And even if you only have 3 people in that family, that's not a big constellation of relationships, but it is a fairly complex one. If everybody, all 3 in that constellation are asking, how can I get what I want? You will occasionally, accidentally, be wanting the same thing as somebody else in your family, but only occasionally and only accidentally. And so for the rest of the time, there is this tension between what I want and what you want. And guess what's going to win? What I want. In a healthy family, the concept is what can make this family thrive? And the only way that you can answer that question is by reflecting on what can I do that would assist the other members of my family in their growth. I can't control it. To dominate doesn't make any sense. It doesn't promote growth. That promotes dependence. And once a child, just thinking now literally, once a child gets 4, 5, 6 years old, the wise parent begins figuring out, how can I release responsibility to them so that they can learn how to take responsibility for themselves. If as they pass through these formative years, there's nothing but control, then they basically learn dependence. And that doesn't often work out in the long run to their advantage. Especially, look around, and there are 20, 23, 25, 30-year-old men and women who are living at home, leeching off mom and dad because they never learned how to become independent. They just knew they could depend on mom and dad to take care of me. I'm not throwing rocks at anybody in particular, but it happens. And it has happened much more often in my generation of parenting, to the degree that there's a term for that some of us in my demographic are boomerang parents, because our kids went out and they came back. And the pretty high degree of probability that when they went out, they went to college, and it was paid for by mom and dad, or mom and dad are now paying off the loans. You see, in a healthy family, we're looking for how can we support the health, the thriving of the other members of the family. Now, if God's church is his family, wouldn't it stand to reason that one of the highest priorities would be the question, how can this family thrive? And I know the answer to that. It's both simple and complex. The simple of the answer is this family of God will thrive when we live and work and relate within God's design. Just comes down to this. When you do it God's way, you thrive. Well, yeah, sometimes doing it God's way is really hard. Well, sure it is. Ask a caterpillar who has become a butterfly. Was getting out of the cocoon easy? No. It was difficult. Ask the bird that's now a bird and not an egg. Was getting out of the egg easy? No. Here's the thing. When we grow and develop, we most often grow and develop through adversity, through difficulty. We far less often grow through comfort. Okay, so if the goal is for God's family to thrive, then we have to figure out, how do we challenge, encourage, help one another, understand God's design, choose it for ourselves, and then live within it. And this, my friends, is a lifelong journey. I am not finished figuring out what does God's design look like in its most objective form. And I'm way not finished figuring out what does that look like in terms of its application in my life. And I want the driver in this whole soul care with Stevie Boy thing to be us discovering more and more what God's design looks like, choosing it for ourselves, and in partnership with Him, living out that design in our daily lives in terms of our choices, our responses, our relationships. God's family is the church, and in a healthy family, we disagree. And in a healthy family, sometimes we sharply disagree. But our number one priority is that the family would thrive, that I would do anything within my power to help you figure out how to thrive and to step into that. I have this big, long diatribe about what I think that could mean to the politics or polity of the church. If it were set up less like a House of Representatives, Board of Deacons, a Senate, Board of Elders, the president, the senior minister or pastor, and then his cabinet below him, hired staff. That's not a real, that has dramatic limitations for helping a family thrive. Now, if it's done properly, I suppose it could work. But in a family, you have people who have to manage the dynamics of relationship while holding the highest value for the other members of the family. We don't deny their failings. We don't pretend they're perfect, but we never lose track of their value. And I'm not going to go deeply into it because I could burn another 25 minutes off telling you all about what I think the church ought to look like. I'll just stop here with the statement. Because God has established the church to be his family, then our first highest priority ought to be seeking to help the family become more healthy, to thrive. My dear children. Then he goes on, let us not love with words or speech, but with actions and in truth. Well, that I could beat a drum for a long time. Because in a way, there is what I talked about as the highest priority and purpose within a family. There it is in a sentence. Don't just love with words and speech. Don't just talk about loving things and how much you love others, but do it with actions and in truth. Okay. I left off last time with the question, basically I just asked you to look into your own life and determine, are you satisfied with how much you are loving with actions in truth? These, again, to love with actions and in truth, that's about a sincerity, a genuineness. That's about the real you. That's about you doing behaviors because you truly love another person. Now, today, in the last couple of minutes we've got, I want to challenge you. I know it sounds stupid, but it could be really useful to get out a little piece of paper or your tablet or smartphone or whatever you use to, jot notes and so forth. And then what I'd like for you to do is I'd like for you to write down as many behaviors as you can think of that demonstrate love to anybody. You might even want to start by saying, when this happens to me, I feel loved. Now, that's a great place to start, but it's not the best, it's not the whole. And here's why. Because there are some things that make me feel loved that are only a bother to other people, like my wife. Some of the things that make me feel loved are just an interruption to her. So you have to count for that, but you make a list. Then I want you to think about this. Who are the people within your circle of influence? Identify them. And some of us have a small circle. Some of us are in a small circle because we don't have the courage to widen our circle. But in your circle of influence, who are those people? And list them out individually. And I know, here we are. This is grade school stuff, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's actually grad school stuff for learning how to love with action and in truth. You made that list of all those people, and then make a commitment. Think of them and do the best you can to reflect on from what I know of this person, what might make them experience love. Write that down beside their name. You go all the way through the list. Now, a lot of us don't have time to make our full-time job making everybody feel loved. And I'm not even saying that. I don't want to imply that. But I do want to say you got to be thinking about this and figuring out how you're going to weave this idea of loving with actions and in truth into the relationships and encounters in your day. Be intentional. And if that means making a list and checking it twice, that's okay. Love in action, with action and in truth, because that's how God's family relates to itself. Okay, I'm done. See you next time on So Care with Stevie Boy.